I drove a cab at night for 12 years, and I never believed in vampires. That changed when 3 drivers were found dead in their taxis. No wounds, no blood, just aged decades overnight. The police called it exhaustion, but I knew better. I'd already picked him up once, and he was still riding with me. The city. In daytime, it's all horns, crowds, and people in a hurry. At night, it becomes quieter and more honest, and you start noticing things you'd never see when the streets are full. Which lights stay on in which buildings? Which roads feel colder than the others? Which corners seem to hold onto old smells after rain? On that night, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle that made the streetlights shine like dull coins. My shift was ordinary for the first few hours. A couple from a restaurant who didn't speak the entire ride. A drunk man who asked me to circle the block twice because he'd forgotten his keys. A nurse heading home at 1:30 who fell asleep in the back and left a faint scent of antiseptic. I was near the river when the request came through. I got no passenger name and no destination, just a pickup point. The address was in the old industrial quarter, on a street that had been closed for years after a warehouse fire. The apps usually update their maps fast, but that street still had the same warning on it in my head. Fences, boarded buildings, and an empty stretch of road nobody had any reason to stand on at night. I should have declined it. Drivers decline strange pickups all the time. Instead, I accepted and turned toward the address. The closer I got, the quieter the streets became. The city thinned out as if it was stepping back. When I reached the industrial quarter, the rain sounded louder on the roof, simply because there was nothing else around. The streetlights here were mostly dead. One still worked at the end of the block, casting a pale cone of light onto cracked pavement and the outlines of shuttered buildings. Someone was standing under it. He was tall and thin, dressed in a long black coat that looked too heavy for the season. He didn't raise a hand or step forward. He just waited, facing the road, as if he knew the exact moment I would arrive. I pulled up beside him and unlocked the doors. He opened the rear door and sat down without asking. The door closed softly behind him. The interior of the cab felt smaller immediately, like the air had thickened. I caught a scent I couldn't place at first. Something metallic and old, like wet iron, faint but persistent. "Where to?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "Drive," he said. His voice was calm and measured, like someone who had never needed to raise it. "I'll tell you when." It wasn't the words that unsettled me. It was how normal he sounded saying them, like the world worked that way for him. I pulled away from the curb and rolled back toward the main road. As we moved through the city, I noticed the traffic lights ahead changing as we approached. One after another turned green just in time, holding long enough to let us pass. The streets around us were emptier than they should have been. The rain made the pavement gleam, reflecting the green lights in long, slick streaks. I glanced up into the rearview mirror. The reflection was wrong. His shape was there, but the mirror didn't catch details properly. The light inside the cab didn't seem to land on his face. It bent away from him, leaving his features softened, almost blurred, like the glass didn't know how to hold on to him. "You can stop checking," he said without looking up. "It won't change." I swallowed and kept driving. After several minutes he spoke again, conversational, as if we were two strangers passing time. "You work nights," he said. "Yes," I replied. "You prefer them," he said, not as a question. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. He leaned back slightly, and the smell of cold metal seemed stronger for a moment. "I've traveled in many ways," he said. "Carts, carriages, trains. People always think the newest thing is the most powerful thing." I watched the road, but my attention kept drifting to the mirror. Even when I wasn't looking directly, I could feel him back there, occupying the space with too much stillness. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Not far," he said. "Just long enough." That phrasing landed wrong. Not far, but long enough. As if distance didn't matter to him, only time. The temperature in the cab dropped gradually. Not a sudden chill, just a steady draining, like warmth was being pulled out through the seams. I turned the heater on. Cold air blew from the vents. I gripped the wheel tighter. "You're doing fine," he said. "Most drivers talk too much when they're nervous." "I'm not nervous," I said. He made a small sound that might have been a quiet laugh without humor. "I haven't introduced myself," he said. "That's impolite, but names change too easily. You can call me what you like." I didn't respond. He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time his face caught a sliver of passing streetlight. His skin looked smooth but dry, like something preserved. His eyes were dark and still. When he smiled, his teeth were too even, worn in a way that suggested age rather than damage. "We'll stop soon," he said. I watched the road ahead and waited for him to tell me where. Instead, he simply said, softly and without urgency, "Here." The cab slowed without my foot touching the brake and rolled to a stop at the curb in front of an ordinary-looking block of buildings. No strange stone doorway, no disappearing architecture, just brick, glass, and closed shops. That normality made it worse because it meant he wasn't relying on illusions. He didn't need theater. He opened the door and stepped out. Before he closed it, he leaned in slightly, close enough that the metallic scent filled my lungs. "Do yourself a favor," he said in the same polite tone. "Don't keep driving when the sun comes up. And if you ever feel like you're getting tired faster than you should, don't ignore it." Then he shut the door and walked away into the rain, disappearing between two buildings as if he belonged there. I sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at the street. The meter hadn't moved. I drove on. I finished my shift. I went home. I slept for a few hours. I woke up with a dull heaviness in my limbs that I blamed on night work and rain. By evening, I'd talked myself into believing the whole thing had been nothing more than a strange passenger and a strange mood. That's what I told myself. It was easier than admitting something else had sat in my cab and left part of itself behind. The first sign that it hadn't been nothing came 2 nights later, and it came in the form of something so small I nearly missed it. I stopped at a taxi rank near the station to take a breather between fare. I leaned back, stretched my fingers, and noticed my hands looked a little different under the dashboard light. Not older exactly, just slightly thinner, as if I'd lost weight in places I hadn't expected. I dismissed it. Then, when I went to rub sleep out of my eyes, I realized my eyelids felt heavier than normal. Not tired in the usual way. More like a slow drag, as if my body had decided it needed more rest than I could give it. The next morning, after my shift, I slept nearly 12 hours without meaning to. I woke up with a dry mouth and a strange metallic taste that didn't go away even after water. That evening, I went to work anyway. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. The city smelled clean in the way it does after a storm. I told myself I'd be fine. I told myself I was overthinking. Night drivers get paranoid sometimes. You spend enough time alone and you start inventing patterns. Around 2 a.m., I heard about the first dead driver. Dispatch chatter travels fast. Someone said a driver had been found slumped over his wheel in his cab near the East End. No crash, no injuries, just dead. The odd detail, the one that made the story stick, was that he looked older than he was. That's how they put it. Like time had done something strange to him overnight. I tried not to think about that. 2 nights later, it happened again. Different neighborhood, same type of death, same detail, no wounds, no signs of violence, just a man in a cab who looked like he'd aged years in a single night. After the second one, drivers started talking. Quietly, because nobody wanted to be the one to say something that sounded insane. People suggested bad drugs, heart conditions, carbon monoxide, but none of it fit. If it was carbon monoxide, there would be signs. If it was drugs, there would be something. Instead, there was only the same unsettling detail. The bodies looked wrong, as if something had been taken that wasn't supposed to be measurable. On the 5th night after I'd picked him up, I saw him again. I was stopped at a red light near the river. The cab was quiet. The radio played low, some late-night talk show, the kind of thing designed to fill silence. I checked my mirrors automatically. He was sitting in the back seat, not blurred, not half seen, clearly there, framed in the rearview mirror like he belonged in the cab. Coat neat, hands folded, eyes dark and steady. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't feel the car shift. He had simply arrived. The talk show on the radio cut out. The station faded into silence. "Good evening," he said pleasantly. I kept my eyes forward. The light was still red. "What do you want?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, like he was amused by how people always ask that. "I want a ride," he said. "That's all." "You can get out," I said. "Yes," he replied, still polite. "But I won't." The light turned green. The cab rolled forward. My hands were on the wheel, but I knew in a quiet part of my mind that I wasn't the one deciding the route now. I turned toward the main roads without thinking, following a path that felt strangely familiar. "You've been tired," he said. I didn't answer. "That's normal," he continued. "Your work is exhausting, but this is different." "What are you doing?" I asked again. He leaned forward slightly, and the metallic scent filled the cab as if the air itself had changed. "I used to feed differently," he said conversationally. "People imagine fangs and blood. They imagine drama. That's because it makes them feel brave. They can picture themselves fighting it." I kept driving. "Blood is quick," he said, "and quick things aren't always satisfying." I glanced at the mirror. His face was calm, almost bored, like we were discussing fuel efficiency. "Now people move too fast," he continued. "Cities are full of strangers passing each other and forgetting. It's hard to remain close to anyone for long." He settled back. "In a cab," he said, "people sit beside you. They share your air, your heat, your time. They can't leave easily. They don't notice what's happening until it's too late." My throat tightened. "You're killing drivers," I said. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a practical point. "They were useful," he said, "until they weren't." I gripped the wheel harder. "I'm not doing this," I said. He smiled faintly, still polite. "I don't need the cab," he said. "The cab simply makes people stay." The words were simple, physical, no philosophy, no hidden rule, just a predator explaining how it works. I pulled over hard, tires hissing on wet asphalt. I stopped at the curb and put the car in park. "Get out," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then opened the door and stepped out. The night air flowed in. He stood on the pavement, coat hanging straight, and watched me without anger. "You can go," he said. "I won't chase you." I didn't ask why. I drove. I returned the cab to the depot that same night. I handed in my keys. I told the supervisor I was done. I didn't explain. I couldn't explain. I just left. For the first time in years, I went home while the city was still dark. I locked my front door. I sat with every light on. I watched the clock crawl toward dawn like it was carrying something heavy. When the sun came up, I convinced myself I'd ended it. I slept in the afternoon and woke up with the same heaviness in my limbs. And I understood, even before the next night arrived, that quitting the job didn't necessarily mean quitting him. I stayed home the next night. I didn't go to the depot. I didn't take another cab. I didn't even step outside. I sat in my living room with the television on low and my phone face down, trying to pretend the city couldn't reach through the walls. Around 2 in the morning, I heard an engine outside. It idled patiently at the curb. I didn't move at first. I sat still, listening, waiting for it to drive away. It didn't. After a minute, I stood and went to the window. My cab was parked outside, headlights off, company markings visible under the streetlight, engine running, as if it had just finished a shift and returned on its own. Beside it stood the man in the long coat. He looked up at my building as if he was checking the correct address. Then his eyes found my window, and he held my gaze without expression, without impatience, like time had no value to him. He raised one hand slightly, not a wave, more like an acknowledgement that he'd arrived. Then he opened the passenger door and sat in the front seat. He didn't look around. He didn't fidget. He simply waited, hands folded neatly, posture perfect, like a gentleman waiting for a driver. A minute later, the cab horn sounded once. Not loud, not angry, just enough to be heard. My stomach tightened, but I didn't let myself turn this into a debate. Debating implies there's a choice. The last few nights had taught me that the only real choice was whether I made it easy or difficult, and difficulty would only stretch things out. I went downstairs. The street was empty, no pedestrians, no cars passing. The air smelled damp and clean. The cab's engine purred steadily, patient as a heartbeat. The passenger door was open when I reached the curb. He smiled politely and moved slightly to the side, making room for me to get in without having to squeeze past him. "Thank you," he said. "I prefer not to wait too long." I didn't answer. I got into the driver's seat. The door closed behind me with a soft, final sound. The meter clicked on by itself. The dashboard lights brightened. The cab rolled away from the curb with smooth certainty, tires whispering on the wet road. "You quit," he observed, as if making small talk. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. "That was sensible," he said. "Most people cling to habits until the habit kills them." I kept my eyes on the road. "You're going to kill me anyway," I said. He considered that for a moment. "Eventually," he replied. "Not tonight." The same calm sentence as before. A polite certainty. No threat needed. No raised voice. He didn't have to be dramatic. He had all the time in the world. We drove through the city in a quiet loop. The traffic lights turned green as we approached. Streets opened ahead of us like a corridor being prepared. The city wasn't helping him out of loyalty. It was helping because the city is built on routines, and he understood routines better than anyone alive. I passed the station rank and saw a cluster of drivers standing around smoking under the awning. Their faces were tired, their shoulders hunched. Ordinary men doing an ordinary job. They didn't look at my cab. They didn't notice anything. "You should look," he said softly. I glanced into the mirror. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw someone sitting behind me in the back seat. A shape. Still. Wrong. Then the reflection shifted and the seat was empty again. "You keep records," he said, almost pleasantly. "Your city does. Your newspapers do. Your supervisors do. They will call it stress, exhaustion, sudden illness. They will choose explanations that keep their world stable." He looked out through the windshield as if the road was unimportant. "It's easier that way," he said. "For them." My hands tightened on the wheel. "You said you don't need the cab," I said. "So why this?" He turned his head toward me, and I caught his profile in the dashboard light. Smooth skin, dry lips, eyes like still water in a deep well. "Because it's polite," he said. "A cab is a private space in a public city. People accept it. They sit. They stay close. They don't suspect." He paused, then added lightly, "It's also comfortable." We drove for nearly an hour. He spoke occasionally, always calm, as if time was a leisurely thing. He asked questions that weren't really questions. How long I'd been driving, whether I liked the city, whether I missed the daytime. He listened to my answers without reacting. At some point, my arms began to feel heavy. Not pain, not cramps. A slow weight, like the muscles were being asked to work underwater. My eyes stayed open, but blinking became an effort I had to remember. "You're fading," he said mildly. I didn't answer. My mouth felt dry. "It won't be dramatic," he continued. "That's the mercy of it. You'll simply become less, little by little." Most people don't realize what's happening until they're too far along to stop it. I swerved slightly and corrected. The cab stayed steady. I tried to pull over. My foot pressed the brake. The cab slowed for a moment, then continued as if my input had been politely acknowledged and ignored. "You can fight if you want," he said. "It won't change the outcome. It will only make the ride unpleasant." The phrase hit like a joke, but he wasn't joking. We passed a street where I knew another driver lived. We passed the depot. We passed places that used to feel like safety because they were familiar. None of it mattered. Near the edge of dawn, the sky began to pale. He watched it without concern. "I told you not to drive after sunrise," he said, almost gently. "That advice was for you." I swallowed. "What happens at sunrise?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I leave," he said, "and I find someone else." The sentence was casual, matter of fact, like changing trains. The cab turned down a side street and slowed. It stopped at a curb I didn't recognize, in front of a building that looked ordinary enough. Brick, glass, closed curtains. He opened the passenger door. Cold morning air slid into the cab. He stepped out, smooth and quiet, and stood on the pavement. For a moment he looked back at me through the open door. "You lasted longer than most," he said politely. "That's worth something, even if you don't get to keep it." Then he shut the door. The engine stopped. The meter stopped. The dashboard lights dimmed. I sat there in silence, hands still on the wheel, as if the cab had frozen around me. The street outside was waking up. A delivery truck passed at the far end of the road. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence. Ordinary noises. I tried to move. My arms responded slowly, as if they belonged to someone else. I forced myself to open the door and step out. My legs held me, but barely. The air tasted sharp and clean, and for a second I thought I'd survived. Then I saw him. He was already halfway down the sidewalk, walking with unhurried grace toward a taxi rank at the corner. He didn't hurry because he didn't need to. Another cab was already there, idling, driver inside, waiting for a fare. He approached it like a man approaching a carriage he'd ordered. The driver inside rolled down the window. I couldn't hear what they said, but I didn't need to. The vampire leaned slightly, spoke politely, and the driver nodded without understanding what he was agreeing to. A moment later, the passenger door opened. He got in. The cab pulled away smoothly, joining the morning traffic as if nothing unusual had happened. And I stood on the pavement beside my silent cab, watching the city swallow them both, knowing the papers would call it exhaustion when the next driver was found slumped over his wheel, looking years older than he was. Because the city always chooses explanations that let it keep moving. And he always finds another driver who thinks the night is just another shift.